I think this government could do with some help on its performance at the moment. So maybe, Ray, your presentation should be shared around government. I'm going to zoom in on the CBI conference, which happened on Monday, as a bit of a crystallization of the pickle that the government's got itself in. So CBI conference, it's tradition that the Chancellor shows up, sometimes the Prime Minister, and gives a speech and a Q&A. And last time round, Labour was, absolutely full of confidence. It was pre-election. The business community had had enough of the Tories, couldn't wait to see the back of them. And you could see, in this happened with all of our clients, the business community's attention moved to Labour. And everybody thought, okay, right, we're going to put the Tory psychodrama behind us. Labour was saying the adults are back in, we're going to be back in charge. The adults will be back in charge. They were well received at Davos. And then the election happened, big majority, as I've said before on these, big majority, very thin public support for the size of majority they've got. But there's been this sort of sense that the wheels are falling off a little bit actually over the last few weeks. The budget, I think, shocked the business community because Rachel Reeves had managed expectations on taxes and said, right, I'm ruling out VAT rises, income tax rises, corporation tax. So there's a list of taxes that they weren't going to raise. So we thought, okay, well, like employer payroll taxes, they're not within that list of exclusions. But the fact that 25 billion quid's worth of tax rises were going on to payroll taxes has set the retail sector, the care sector, and the hospitality sector into an absolute fury with the government. And you could see it at the CBI conference. And the CBI is an organisation that's had a bit of a rough ride over the last few years for reasons that we all know about. But suddenly it's got a raison d'etre again because there is this sense that Labour is actually slightly taken business for a ride. Now, there are certain parts of the business community that I deal with, the financial service sector, they're pretty happy. But anybody that's got large numbers of relatively low paid staff is getting a huge increase in their NICs, and they're getting minimum wage increases, and we've got labour market reform as well. So that's a long way of saying that the Labour's honeymoon with business is over. It was going to end at some point, but it's happened much more quickly, perhaps, than I thought it would. And you could see it in Rachel Reeves' sort of demeanor as well, that she looked a little bit uh, slightly harassed actually at the conference. She looked a bit off center, and I think that's quite interesting. I don't think she was quite used to that level of questioning or pushback from business. But she said, look, okay, I've increased taxes, but I haven't heard, and everybody's complaining, I haven't heard any alternatives. I've got to get the money from somewhere. Nobody's coming with any alternatives. And then this second commitment comes, which is we will not put up taxes again on businesses in this parliament. So that's quite a big commitment to make, especially if bond yields stay up and maybe the NI increases don't raise as much tax as she was hoping because of dynamic effects, right? You put the taxes up, businesses change behavior, and the projections don't quite work out. So that's linked to what she's put herself into a bit of a box there. And if you've got a budget to deliver in 12 or 24 months' time, she's ruled out a whole load of taxes that she can't touch now. So the number of taxes she can actually increase are becoming narrower and narrower and narrower. And what Keir Starmer has said as well, we're trying to front load all these tax rises early in the Parliament, but I think they've made a bit of a error there. I want to talk about Kemi Badenoch because she showed up at the CBI conference as the relatively newly installed Tory leader. I think the takeaway from that is she seemed to me to be a lot more confident, but she's an opposition, and it's easy being an opposition. She sort of said, "Well, look, I'm not even at the point of making policy at this point. We are going to have a long discussion in the Tory party about principles and where we go from here, but I'm not going to be drawn on policy." Because we just haven't got any at the moment. She said, we've got to go away and reflect on the dismal performance that we had, the fact that we let business down pretty badly in the last government, and we've got some work to do. So That's all happened. And then overnight, as Richard says, Louise Haig has resigned. So that's the first cabinet resignation. There are questions about Rachel Reeves' the embellishments on her CV, and there's been this long-running question about freebies and suits and Arsenal tickets and all the rest of it. So there's also this sort of sense around the government that having been um, very strong on ethics and going after the Tories for misleading the public, for Partygate, for low-level corruption, you're sort of seeing that, your average man or woman down the pub sort of thinking, well, are Labour that much different? I think that's quite a difficult perception that the party's really got to get control and the government's got to get control of. So where does that leave the polls? Well, it is feeding through. As I said, Labour thin support at the election, barely over 34% vote share. That's now dropped to 29%, below the magic 30% mark. And the Conservatives have climbed a little bit from 24 points at the election to 26 now. And Reform have picked up 4 points. So they've gone from 14 to 18%. So the sort of spread between the Tories and Labour has narrowed. And I wouldn't be surprised to see the Tories outpoll Labour at some point in the next 6 to 12 months or so. Not because the Tories have got anything particular to say, but because it's an expression of dissatisfaction with Labour. So I think, yeah, he's got a job to do. He's got a job to do, and I will leave it at that, Richard.
Nothing, not okay. Nothing about America then on this occasion. But are we going to wait
Well,
for
I think
the?
look,
Are we going to wait for Trump? Because next time we talk, it'll be in 29th of Jan, which or 31st of Jan,
yeah.
so it'll
So
be
we've got his
all
picks.
over.
We've got his picks, haven't we, Richard? So we know who he's putting into cabinet positions. I think the key point about Trump is, and I think we could see this at the last retuning, is that the picks that he's making are all pretty hardline on the trade agenda. Uh, Tariffs are coming against Mexico, Canada, and China, he says. And I think there's a question about what happens to European countries as well. That's going to be quite bumpy.